So, Jay Ruud, what lovable book are we talking about today?
Well, Stacey Margaret Jones, I'll give you a hint. The Queen of Air and Darkness.
Have I read this book?
I believe so, yes.
Is it His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman?
It is not.
Oh! Welcome to Between the Covers, where author of the Merlin Mysteries and the Robin Hood Mysteries series, Jay Ruud, and I, author Stacey Margaret Jones, who wrote Mr. Catherine, discuss one entry on his list of the 100 most lovable novels in the English language each episode. And today I am trying to guess the book, and after a humiliating first guess, it just had that fantasy feeling.
Yes, it did.
All right. Let me have it. What's the second hint?
Here's hint number 2. The Candle in the Wind.
Something by Elton John?
It's not the Elton John story, no.
I've just been thinking about Princess Diana a lot. Okay, I don't know.
And here's clue number 3. The Sword in the Stone.
Oh, is it? I have a kind of battle going on in my mind because I have one guess left. The only thing I can think of is like Excalibur or something like that, which I haven't read.
And it's a movie.
It's The Natural.
No. No, this isn't a movie. Excalibur is a movie.
I need to stop talking.
The novel is The Once and Future King by T.H. White.
I do believe I read that in a class.
Yes, I know which class.
Obviously, I don't remember it very well, but I was on the right Arthurian track by the end when I was just popping off with anything I could think of.
Well, Sword in the Stone is kind of a giveaway.
I know, but I couldn't remember the names of those classic canonical Arthur books. So
yes, and T.H. White's Once and Future King is probably the most popular 20th century treatment of the King Arthur story.
Oh, okay.
And it's the one that does the least to eviscerate the traditional Arthurian legend.
Oh, well.
I mean,
let's get into it.
The other Arthurian books of the 20th century do all kinds of strange things like, let's pretend that Arthur was actually a historical king, and we'll write it as if it's history. And, of course, that's
right.
A crock.
Well, okay. We're going to spill some tea here in this episode, but before we get into the inside baseball of the medievalist culture, let's talk, and medievalism, let's talk about who else likes this book. To make your list, you compiled a number of other lists and read through things on those that you had not yet read. Is this book on any of those other sources, or is it one of your idiosyncratic choices?
I think you could call this an idiosyncratic choice because I had in mind to have it on my list no matter what. And it's not on some of those better-known lists of the 100 greatest novels in English and that sort of thing, but it does appear on some of the best genre novel lists. For instance, Fantasy Book Review had a 2022 list of the top 100 fantasy books, and Once and Future King comes in at number 22. NPR did a readers survey of some 60,000 readers in 2011 to find the top 100 science fiction / fantasy books, and The Once and Future King ranked number 47 among those. There's a British periodical, Modern Fantasy, which in 1988 published a 100 best novels in that genre list that White's book was on. Time Magazine did a 2020 list of the 100 best fantasy books of all time, as compiled by a committee of some major authors in the genre, and it was on that list. It's on the Library Journal's 150 best books of the century list as number 100. And that's the 20th century.
Yeah, I figured that.
In 2021, the Center for Fiction included it as one of its 200 books that shaped 200 years of literature. And you'll like this one, the 100 favorite novels of librarians. It's number 64 on that list.
All right. That's shout out.
Many people like this book.
To my mother, the retired librarian. So,
Indeed.
All right. So what year did this come out?
Well, Once and Future King is a compilation of 4 different short novels that White wrote between 1938 and 1940. But they were published as one complete collection, one complete novel in 1958 as The Once and Future King.
Is it a novel or is it linked novellas or short stories?
You would think it was linked novellas, but in fact, the themes run through all 4 books.
You have the feeling of reading a novel when you read it? Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
do.
How long is the total thing, not the
it's
individual?
more than 600 pages.
Oh, so it's an investment in time. But it sounds like, I mean, you said I read it, but obviously I don't remember it very well.
I just said I thought you read it. Perhaps in that class,
maybe
you pretended to read it.
No, if I hadn't read it and pretended to read it, I would have gone back and read it because I felt a lot of guilt about doing that. So, like I did for Portrait of the Artist, I did go back and read that because I did not finish it and I felt bad.
Boy, true confessions.
Well, you know this. So I must have finished.
I do, but
yeah.
our listener doesn't.
I did write an excellent paper on Portrait of the Artist as a young man that I got a very good grade on and many good comments. However, I did not finish the book before I wrote the paper. So, at a certain point, you have to just, get down to writing. And I looked at the clock and I was like, I'm not going to finish this and have time to write. I better write. So then after the class was over and I got an A, I went back and finished the book because I felt bad. Anyway, so I must have read this or I would have gone back and finished it. But I just don't have a lot of recall. But it sounds like if you're interested in King Arthur and that genre, this would be a great novel for you to read.
Yeah.
Because it's contemporary-er
it is
than a lot of the canon.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's if I had to recommend one book from the 20th century or later, that was the book that you ought to read if you're a King Arthur aficionado. It would be The Once and Future King.
Well, I would recommend your King Arthur or your Merlin Mysteries series.
I would recommend them too. But
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I mean, the truth is, The Once and Future King is the book that made me interested in the Arthurian legend.
Oh, I love this. How did you come to it? Like, where did you intersect? Where did your life and the life of this book intersect?
In my senior year of high school.
Okay.
I was in what at that time was considered a college freshman class in my senior year. And it was a literature class. And we did a unit in the class on the Arthurian legend, during which we read actually parts of Tennyson's Idylls of the King, which is probably...
I also read that.
Yeah. But that probably was White's inspiration.
Right.
Because he would have been, when he was a boy, that would have been the most contemporary major work about the Arthurian legend that was around. But then that was the same year that the film version of the Lerner and Loewe musical Camelot came out.
Oh.
And our class did a field trip to Milwaukee where it was showing on this huge, gigantic screen that, they used to have before they'd cut those big movie palaces into 7 different
multiplexes.
Theaters. Yeah. And we saw Camelot, and I knew that Camelot was based on The Once and Future King.
Right.
So I read The Once and Future King.
Oh, okay.
And that's what got me really into the Arthurian legend. So I would not have my 6-volume Merlin Mysteries series if I hadn't read The Once and Future King when I was a senior in high school.
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful how that happens because, art begets art. And also, you enjoyed the movie so much that there was part of your mind that was like, I want more of these, right? Like, I want to know that. And I love that feeling when you're engaged by something and you're excited to learn about it and you're excited to immerse yourself in that. And so then you found this novel and the rest is history.
The rest is history.
That's wonderful. All right. So before
We'll cut that part.
we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but we actually need to do the down and dirty summary. And can you earn the harps of glory, or will you sneak off with the trombone of defeat?
We'll find out.
The trombone of humiliation.
The trombone of utter failure. But no, that's not going to happen because
All right. Did you
I
prepare?
have thought about this. And
It's almost as if you knew I was going to ask.
I guessed that you might just ask that question.
Okay.
And it's a very complex story. It's 600 pages of the story of King Arthur from the time he's a boy to the time that he is about to fight in his last battle. So I can't really give much detail. But
No.
what I will do is give you one very brief summation of what happens in each of the 4 books.
Perfect.
The first book is The Sword and the Stone. And that tells the story of the young Arthur's fostering by Sir Ector and his tutoring by the wizard and seer Merlin. And Merlin teaches Arthur by changing him into animals so that he will understand everything that happens in the animal world that's applicable to the human world. The second book is called The Queen of Air and Darkness, and it deals with the childhoods of Arthur's nephews, Sir Gawain, Sir Gaheris, Sir Agravain, and Sir Gareth, who are the children of the king and queen of Orkney. And it also deals with their mother, Arthur's half-sister Morgause, and ends with her seducing her half-brother and his impregnating her with Mordred, who will be the villain who brings the table down. The third book...
No.
The third and fourth books...
Oh, my God.
This is very, very brief.
No,
the
it's
third
not.
and fourth
it's
books.
not brief in comparison. It is brief empirically.
The third and fourth books are the story. The third book is called The Ill-Made Knight. It's the story of Lancelot's youth and maturing and gaining his reputation as Arthur's greatest knight and beginning his love affair with Queen Guinevere and his failure in the quest of the Holy Grail. And then the final book, The Candle in the Wind, completes the disastrous story of the love triangle that leads to the tragedy of Arthur's doom and the fall of the Round Table, brought about largely by Arthur's nephew Agravain and his bastard son, his bastard, incestuously conceived son, Mordred. And that's my brief harps of glory.
That is trombone of defeat. No. When you start to say a third or fourth sentence about the first book, it's no. But thank you for all your hard work on that.
You're welcome.
It's not me, it's you. All right. So, why is this book lovable?
Everything about it is lovable. If you happen to have an interest in the legend of King Arthur.
But why? I mean, let's back up a little. If you like to read and you like good writing and you're open to various topics, are you going to love this book even if you're not like an Arthurian?
I think you will. I think
Okay.
you'll get sucked in. I mean, from the very beginning. I mean, you don't really know, if you're coming to this sort of blind, you don't really know that the character they call Wart in the first book is going to be King Arthur. I mean, you learn that his name is Arthur. Then Merlin comes along and becomes his tutor. by then, if you know anything about the story, you know that this is the young King Arthur. But in the whole ingenious method of teaching him by changing him into animals and birds, and he learns from each species that he's changed into something that makes that particular species important or unique, or something bad about them. And when he becomes an ant, he realizes how bad it is to be in a society where everything you do is controlled by the state, for instance. So that's interesting in itself, and lovable in itself. The story of the kind of heart-rending story, which is what caught me with Camelot, of this love triangle where you have these ties between these three people, where Guinevere is wife to Arthur, but lover to Lancelot, and Lancelot is the vassal of Arthur, and he owes him his allegiance, but also the lover of Guinevere, and Guinevere the wife of Arthur, and so the person who is supposed to be closest to him in holding up the kingdom. Arthur's connection with Lancelot, who is his best friend, and the person who holds up his kingdom because he's an undefeatable force on the battlefield. And the love that goes among the three of them, that becomes this disaster in the end, is something that's so human, and so pitiful.
Yeah.
By the end.
Well, it sounds like that White D mythologizes them.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah. They're not just these plaster images or two-dimensional characters. They're people who have these feelings. Gawain, who's Arthur's nephew, his oldest nephew, and really the heir apparent until Mordred comes along, and it's sort of revealed that Mordred is actually Arthur's son. Gawain is a remarkable character who is so devoted to his family. And when his brothers are killed, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but not too much of a spoiler. He becomes uncontrollable and essentially takes over. He's a very relatable character, and one that you can really understand. What seems to be a complete reversal on his part by the end of the book is understandable because of that love of his family. Anyway, the book is full of these great adventures, but also these very relatable human situations. I want to say that this is just by way of a coming out of nowhere, a tangent, shall we say, that, well, the film version of Camelot was very inspiring to me. The film version of The Sword and the Stone, which was made earlier, may be the worst movie ever made about the Arthurian legend.
Okay.
I mean, reading the book is an experience that's memorable. Watching that movie is an experience that's also memorable, but in a very different way.
Not in a way that you would like to be released from those memories forever.
Yeah, it's Disneyfied.
I don't think I've ever seen it. Is it animated?
You're very lucky. Yeah, it's animated.
Oh, that's why I haven't seen it.
No, I don't know. But it makes Merlin into just this kind of goofy character. But there are things that are added to it that have nothing to do with the book, that just throw in. The worst of which is this wizard battle that he has with Mad Madam Mim.
Well...
And it's ridiculous and absurd and not in the book and serves no purpose other than kids might like this. So don't waste your time with that movie.
Well, let's not get off on too much on that tangent. Let's not give them our valuable podcast real estate.
No.
So the people feel very real, right?
Yes.
they're in very real situations, whether you're the mythic King Arthur, head of the Knights of the Round Table and Camelot, etc. But it sounds like the plot is epic.
Yeah, it is epic in the sense that it covers the life of this mythic hero on whom the fate of the entire nation depends,
Right.
which is kind of the definition of an epic hero. And the plot follows the traditional story of King Arthur as it's come down to us.
The canon, so to speak.
Yeah, especially through Thomas Malory. Malory wrote in the 15th century.
And he was French, right?
No, he wrote in
Oh,
English.
I was thinking of, who am I thinking of? The French?
Chrétien de Troyes.
Yes, sorry. Sorry.
But a lot of these, a lot of stories, a lot of romances about Arthur had been written during the Middle Ages. Malory comes kind of at the end of the Middle Ages, and he brings all of the stories together, all of the strands together in one large epic
right.
plot. And that's the story that really influenced White much more than Tennyson did. He goes back to the story as Malory told it.
Was Tennyson, was his source material Malory as well? Or?
Yeah, mostly.
Okay.
Malory finished writing what we usually call the Morte d'Arthur, which is really the title that William Caxton gave it. It's not the title that Malory himself gave it.
That's why I was thinking it was French, because of the title.
Yeah. So Malory finishes about 1470. Malory is writing during the Wars of the Roses. And he was a knight during the War of the Roses. And was in prison because he'd been on the wrong side during much of the 1460s, and finished writing the Morte d'Arthur in prison, 1470. William Caxton, the first English printer, got hold of a manuscript of the Morte d'Arthur and printed it in 1485. Now, 1485 is a very important date in British history. It's the date that the War of the Roses ends, and the date that Henry Tudor becomes Henry VII and initiates the Tudor monarchy. Henry was from Wales. Henry was Welsh. The history of King Arthur, I say history, but it's a mythic history.
Legend.
That's a legend. Arthur was British, not English.
Right.
That is, he was Celtic. And that's what the Welsh were. Malory's book ends with Malory saying that King Arthur did not die, but was born to the Isle of Avalon, the fairy isle of the Lady of the Lake, and there he would stay while his wounds were healed until the time in the future when Britain needed him most. Thus he becomes known as Rex Quondam Rexque Futuris, which means the once and future king.
Right, because Rex is king.
Yeah. When Caxton published it, he dedicated the work to Henry, who, being of Welsh heritage, identified with the Celtic King Arthur. So it was great Tudor propaganda. The suggestion that the return of the king had happened because it was a king of Celtic heritage.
Right.
And in Henry, Arthur was making his return. And Henry, of course, really played on this whole Arthurian connection and named his first son Arthur.
But then he must not have become the king,
No,
because
he
we've
died.
had no other kings, Arthur.
No, Arthur died, and his second son, Henry, became Henry VIII.
Right,
and
interesting.
inherited Arthur's wife, and that's a whole other story. But the point is that Malory's text becomes a story of courage and chivalry and the best things about knighthood at a time when the worst things about knighthood were going on and the knights were killing each other in this civil war of the Roses. White calls his book, The Once and Future King, a direct allusion to Mallory, and he's writing during the World War II. So he's writing about this time when knighthood was in flower, when chivalry was the order of the day, and when courage was going to make the evil go away, and be victorious. And so he's writing. He finishes this in 1940.
It sounds like it's part of this kind of conversation in the zeitgeist, which Hemingway is also responding to, which is the code hero, right? There's a moral code. You behave according to this code, right? Okay. It's not the same, but it sounds to me code. Like they're both articulating a need, a desire, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like, these stories, these kind of archetypal stories appeal because these are things that we always want.
Yeah.
We want an orientation.
Yeah.
We want guide. We get ourselves in trouble as human beings because we love a hierarchy. And sometimes the person embodying that is not the person who needs to be doing it, right? But this kind of idea of, here is this king, right? Here are these, not just this king, but all the knights, right, have their own tales and stories and adhere to this chivalric code, right?
Yeah. Now, one of the things that holds the whole book together is Arthur's idea, his desire to create a just society. Mm-hmm. He even in the very first book, Wart says to Merlin in the first book, "If I were to be made a knight," said the Wart, staring dreamily into the fire, "I should insist on doing my vigil by myself as Hob does with his hawks, and I should pray to God, let me encounter all the evil in the world in my own person, so that if I conquered, there would be none left, and if I were defeated, I would be the one to suffer for it." And through this initial thought, he invents chivalry as the book goes on, which begins with his deciding that might must be used for right. Mm-hmm. You weren't just a knight because you could knock everybody off their horse. You were a knight and should use the power to
create a better society.
Yeah, to make things right.
Right.
As the book goes on, and he realizes that might ultimately be too simple. He comes up with the idea of justice for all, and that you would have a court of law that decided whether one thing was right or another thing was right, as opposed to
somebody with power saying you are wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And I have decided.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is what he wants, and this is what he sees falling apart at the end when he's going to enter his final battle, in which he'll be defeated. But there's a great ending that the Once and Future King has, which is put into the ending of Camelot. There's a young boy.
Is Camelot based on White's novel?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's not from the whole thing. It's based on.
It's based specifically on the last two books of White's novel.
Okay.
This boy who is kind of running around in the woods near Arthur's tent on the eve of the last battle, and he calls the boy, and it's a page who tells him his name is Tom of Warwick. Mm-hmm. And Arthur actually knights him. He's only like 12 or something. But he knights him and makes him Sir Tom of Warwick, which is where Thomas Malory is from. Oh. So he tells Tom of Warwick to tell the story.
Oh, wow.
And pass it on. I don't want this to be a spoiler because...
no, you don't. It's a long book. Don't wreck the end.
But, I mean, that basically is how it ends. It's a hint of how Rex Quandam might yet become, despite all hope, Rex Futurus. It's Arthur in his tent before the final battle. It's like Christ in Gethsemane. He's tormented by what he sees as the failure of his dream of a just society. And when he when he talks to the young page, Tom of Warwick, he convinces the boy to stay out of the battle and to live on and tell the story of the Round Table to others. And Arthur will live again in that story, as Mallory passed it down to Tennyson, and Tennyson passed it down to White, and White passed it down to me. The world wouldn't forget Arthur, and the dream wouldn't die, the dream of a just society.
Yeah.
In the end, Arthur says, the fate of this man or that man was less than a drop, although it was a sparkling one, in the great blue motion of the sunless sea. So there's a lot to love in the book. So that theme of the just society, I think, is one of the things that connects all four books and makes it important.
And that's interesting because one of the reasons it comes to an end is because of the betrayal at the top of the society.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which also just shows why humans yearn for this and how we are confounded from achieving it.
Yes.
Because we have feelings.
Yes.
That's fascinating. All right.
One other thing that's lovable about this book is the narration. A lot of books like this that are kind of set back in the mists of history are written by, or the narrative voice is sort of like, here is someone from that time telling you about the things that have happened. But the voice that tells the story of a once and future king is a 20th century voice.
Who is the narrator? Or is it just a...
Well, it's a third-person narrator. But it's one that is speaking definitely from the 20th century because he keeps bringing in 20th century things.
Oh, wow. I didn't remember that at all.
To compare or contrast or whatever.
Oh,
and part of that is related to the strange thing about Merlin, which is that he lives backwards.
Oh.
Merlin doesn't age, he youthens as time goes on.
Like Benjamin Button.
Yeah, kind of. And it seems that Merlin's childhood was in the 20th century because he will say things like, when I was younger, this guy named Freud came along and made this suggestion.
Goodness.
And so it's like the narrator knew Merlin himself when he was younger.
Well, I like that because you reminded me of something I was thinking about before when you were talking about how he uses Mallory for his source material, so to speak. The canonical narrative of King Arthur and the court. And it reminds me of that Robert Frost saying that, he didn't have a lot of use for free verse because he thought that writing poetry without rhyme and meter was like playing tennis without a net, right? You have to have some constraints in order to show, I think, your true artistry, right? So he has the restraint or the constraints of the existing legend. Yeah. And yet he injects this incredibly creative new idea, I guess, in terms of Merlin being in the 20th century, which makes it so it's not just a retelling in contemporary language. There's something new in it that helps you understand what existed there before, right? Yeah. So the net is there, and he's still really able to play this brilliant tennis.
and it really brings the story into contemporary times.
Right, makes it feel even more relevant.
The narrator is contemporary.
Right.
And who knows, maybe Merlin's still around.
Yeah, interesting.
You never know.
Well, why might people not like this book? I know that might be hard for you.
No. I mean, I can see people maybe... if you don't like fantasy, you're probably not going to like this book. And a lot of the book is about growing up. The first book is all about Arthur growing up. until he pulls the sword from the stone and becomes the king at the age of 15. But the second book is about Gawain and Agravain and Gareth growing up under their crazy witch of a mother. And, Agravain has this strange, very Oedipal relationship with his mother, which, implies one of the reasons that he becomes such a villainous person ultimately at the end. The third book is about Lancelot growing up until he comes to Arthur's kingdom and then, meets Guinevere and all that. But all of the childhoods of the main characters are kind of given to you before you see what the adult outcome is of those childhoods. But, if you're not interested in childhoods, I guess you wouldn't be interested in the
or
book.
backstory.
Yeah.
But it also is interesting because it's also about how a just society grows up, right?
Yeah.
And how society grows and if it's growing in a good way or a bad way or that's interesting. Okay. So where are you ranking it? How are we doing?
I am going to put this at number 20.
Okay. So low. I thought it would be number one the way you were rhapsodizing about it.
It's right after Pale Fire.
Oh, okay.
And right ahead of Watership Down, another fantasy.
Right, which is also about just society.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, that was obviously that surprised me. Even though I've read it, I don't remember it at all.
Well, time to go back and read it again.
Time to go back. All right.
So it must be time for Chaos Reader.
Yes. Well, I finally finished the biography, the kind of dual biography of Elizabeth and Philip by Tessa Dunlop. And it took me a very long time to read that book, a couple months. It's not long. But I realized that maybe I liked the idea of it, but there were some issues with it. So I picked up this novel by Dolly Alderton called Good Material. I think it was one of the New York Times best fiction books of 2024. And the blurb on the front from the New York Times says, like Nora Ephron with a British twist, delightful. And I felt like I could really go for that because I think my next book will probably be another biography. I'll comment on that when the time comes. So I didn't want to have anything nonfiction again. And I'm about 40 pages into it, and it really is fun to read. And it just, you know how you feel when you open a book and then you just really want to read it. And you don't want to do much else. And that's how I'm feeling. It's very good. It's about, it's the point of view of a 30-something London comedian, and his girlfriend has just broken up with him after several years. And he does not want this breakup. And he is struggling. So, but he's a comedian, so it's from his point of view, and it's a funny voice, and it's great. So I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank our listeners all over the world, and our producing sensei, Jerry Bruno. And we'd like to thank any of you who not only listen, but also share our podcast with your friends and book lovers. And we will see you next time. Between the covers.